What up? My name is Big Lou, and you are now listening to Go Produce. We're the show that explores how music industry professionals turn their passions into profit. If you're curious about the future of music composition from an associate professor, then this episode is for you. Alrighty. Thank you, Factor, for funding part of this initiative. Today's theme of the episode is, what does the future of music composition look like, and how best to adapt to it? Our guest today is Jay Hodgson. He's an associate professor of popular music studies at Western University, where he teaches courses on songwriting and music record production. He was awarded a Governor General's Academic Gold Medal in 2006. Jay has authored and edited numerous books on recording practice, published with, among others, Bloomsbury, Taylor and Francis, Continuum, Focal, Routledge, and Oxford University Press. I bring you Jay Hodgson.
How's it going?
Yes. He's in the virtual building.
Right on.
Yes. Thank you, Jay, so much for being here. I want you to know that we do appreciate your time, so let's make the most of this and go produce.
All right.
Fantastic. Our first segment is the basics.
Okay.
Alrighty, Jay. You like that? That? We're trying to get into it, build the energy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do with the basics is we're going to start off ultimately understanding where you're coming from and where you want to go.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yep.
I'd like to start off with this question. What is your first musical memory?
So I remember I think I was like 5 or 6, and I had heard A Day in the Life on the radio, and I had grabbed an instrument in the bass and figured out like how to play the first few chords. And I was the baby of a really big family. And this is like, mid 70s, the type of thing where, you go up to your dad at some point and he's like, you can talk,
What is going on here? Yeah.
So I remember playing it and he was like, holy crap. That's like, do you like that?
Yeah.
And I
That's
said,
a good question to start.
Yeah. And so I remember he ran out and got the Beatles' Blue Greatest Hits on vinyl, put it on the record player, was like, this is how you do it. And I can remember sitting, like a little 3-4-year-old staring at the record player, and it's Strawberry Fields. And I remember thinking, my initial thought was, this sounds like it's sped up or slowed down or something. Like, I just remember thinking like it sounds a little off, and then forgetting about that. And of course, later on, you learn that they're both speeded, the two parts of the track. So it is actually off, which is interesting. But I remember watching the record turn, listening to the track, and I can still sort of see that in my basement. Yeah. That's my earliest musical memory.
That's super awesome. It's almost like a magical experience. You're like, what is this wild experience?
Absolutely. Or when I'd be watching Sesame Street, and me and Julio used to come on, and Paul Simon, right? And they'd be dancing in this, me and Julio down by the schoolyard. But I remember, I remember hearing that, and this is like before the internet. And again, like, you're 4 or 5, you don't even really know what TV is. It's just like this box, broadcast cool stuff. And I just remember being like, what the hell was that? What was that? And like, this was back when you could be haunted by a song for like years.
Like,
what the hell was that? And so my earliest memories of experiencing music are these like really jarring moments where it captivated me and took me out of whatever the environment was that I was at the time.
That's incredible. And then, okay, so would you say that gradually over time, as you began to understand really what you were doing and the science behind it, it turned from a magic into a science, and you began to manipulate it almost?
Kind of. So here's what I'll say. So I tend to be a little, I think, different than a lot of people who work in this field, because the very first thing I teach my students is a quote by Claude Debussy, where he says, "Pleasure is the law. Theory is for weaklings." I think a lot of and I think a lot about why we have this emphasis on the technical in teaching this. Partially because we're modeling hearing, but it's really the gear is based on models of hearing. So we use language from that area. So when we talk about like 440 hertz, let's say, that feels different than saying pluck that string right there. But it's the same thing. These are musical instruments, and they are used to enact a kind of creativity. And Phil Ramone, I think, put it best when he sort of said, I remember it was in an Art of Record Production conference, and he was being interviewed, and he said, if you put 4 or 5 different people behind the same console in the same environment with the same musicians, they're going to produce 4 or 5 totally different sounding things. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, and I think about this. So when I teach production to graduate students, because they're a little further along and they can think about creativity, I'll often give them books about art written by artists, because rarely do they get bogged down in this assumption that you have to understand how your brushes were manufactured in order to create great art. And so I think it's a little bit of reassurance. I think that, in the absence of feedback from an industry over time, you'll find a lot of young people are obsessed with the technique, because it's reassuring to think if I bust off my reverb and if I high pass the reverb and I do this checklist, then I've done a good piece of work. Right. If I have this technical checklist, I've done good work. And then over time, you just work and you realize sometimes that shitty mic that costs 75 cents, from your older brother gets a great vocal sound off this one vocalist in this one room, and you become far less interested in the technical.
That really lightens up the creative aspect. What can I make? What can I produce with what I have?
That's all that matters.
And that's the magic aside from the sounds. That's cool.
Absolutely. And Sylvia Massey, I think, is a great producer in that regard. If you get her book, Recording Unhinged, I like to give that to my audio engineering students. I mean, there's pictures of her duct taping Maynard upside down to a door to get the performance. It's like, it's important to know. The way I would explain it is that the technique, the running scales of recording is learning the technique, is learning the technical aspects, understanding, the difference between a condenser mic and a dynamic mic and why were they manufactured that way. But really at the end of the day, they're tools and you play with them.
Yeah.
And really it's just a bunch of like macho flexing to get bogged down in details. I always use the 7B with an electret, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. That's cool, because a lot of people will follow that technical route. So it's cool to hear your perspective.
I think it's reassuring. It feels
100%.
safe. Yeah.
100%. You said that you tell your students pleasure is the law. But I'm curious, what was the first lesson that the industry taught you? Relationships, man. Being a good hang far outweighs being the best guitarist in the room. Showing up for the gig, doing the job. I was lucky enough when I was younger, to get on tour with a guy named John McDermott, who was #1 in Australia, and he was really doing like adult contemporary stuff. Yeah. But we were playing these gigs in like Great Big Sea before they were famous. Alan Doyle and them were there, and you'd watch these various different groups come on stage and approach the audience in different ways. But then when you're backstage, it didn't matter. No one was a star enough where they had their own little area, So you had to be professional. And then, I'm fortunate enough that every member of my band from back in Boston in the late 90s has a #1, a lot of them have Grammys. They've done very well. And I've, like some of them are producing Gaga and get a certification for their work on AWOL Nation and these sorts of things, which is cool. And so I've been able to see that. But at the end of the day, a lot of them, 90% of them, were situated by way of family. Interesting.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would put it down to 90 to 95% of success in this industry is trust funds and family relations. And that's the truth. And there's no way around that. If you really want to succeed, I'm not talking about grinding. I mean, success.
Oh, that's a big eye opener. And you just dropped that on everyone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the truth. And you have to get out there and meet people and I mean, I will say there's an aging thing as well. Like aging past a particular point. I loved aging a bit because the people who were into it for reasons other than I don't even know why, but very unprofessional. Slowly over time, they can't keep it up. It's a lifestyle thing.
It diminishes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I found by my mid-30s, anyone I was really interacting with, even if they were younger, they were just very serious about music. You know, they wanted to do this. They were professional. It was a job, and it was sort of that simple. Yeah, and that's my point of view and my experience. Don't get me wrong. I don't have the stats to back it up, but that's
no. It's
but
good.
I will say my experience. Yeah, my experience is that a lot of trust funds and a lot of uncles, aunts being publicists for very well off musicians. You know,
right.
I'm also older, so this could have changed in the past decade or so.
Curious. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it did.
Yeah.
Jay, that's the end of the basics.
Okay.
You survived that round.
Told you I was chatty.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it was fantastic. It was fantastic. You just kept on like throwing info. Bah, bah, bah. Okay. We collected it all. Okay. But that's awesome. Our next segment is What's Yo Take?
What's your cake?
What's your cake? Take. Oh, that does look like a C, hey?
It's a T. Okay, yeah.
It's a T, yeah.
What's your take?
What's your take? Yeah.
Okay.
Here, we're going to be throwing different kinds. Here, we're going to be throwing different kinds of situations at you, and we want ultimately your perspective.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Contributing music to films is the most lucrative approach for producers.
Depends. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say now. Really, really hard to say. I think if they flat out like license the track and pay you a fee, it's not necessarily all that lucrative. Your bottom line, you have to think about how much your creativity costs. So if you're just like slapping together splice samples and it takes you like 20 minutes and you're selling that for a few $100, sure, that's pretty lucrative. But you have to think about what lucrative is. If it's costing you $1,000 just to lay down a demo for the track eventually, and you're not pulling in, more than that, then it's not lucrative. Like, you really have to think about how much did this song cost me to make.
And I'd say also outside of money, time, energy, that kind of stuff too. No?
That's money.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the relationship with the filmmaker is far more lucrative at the end of the day. Yeah. The fact that they like you, they want to drop you a line the next time they have a project, that means you're gainfully employed in a freelance setting. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think that the money is as good unless you already are at a point where you're making money, and then you're paying a lot of people to be at that point.
Right.
So in terms of filthy lucre, it's good money. Yes, but I tend to think that it should be something you're doing along with a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Don't make that your own only focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about would signing to a label, whether it's independent or a major label, help you get that? Or maybe even create your own label to be taken more seriously?
Yeah, and then what do you mean by label? I think the term is just meaningless now at this point. You go to DistroKid or CD Baby, upload a track, and hey, I'm running a label. Having people doing marketing and promotions for you is fantastic if they have scale, if they can scale your project and they have reach to scale your project. But if they don't, then you're really just looking to again, it's like emotionally reassuring. I'm on a label. I'm actually a musician. That sort of thing, as opposed to saying like, here's a track, here's a bit of music, and I've made some money off it, which is really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Does representation only matter if they have reach then?
I mean, representation, they're taking some of your value, just as long as they're offering you value, but you have to be clear on what the value is. I have students come to me all the time in their fourth year, and we have these conversations, and I'll say, what do you want to do? And some of them will say, well, get signed by a label. And the very first question I always ask is, what label? Who are you interested in?
Yeah.
And they don't know. And basically it's really, I just want, parents were giving me money before, and I want that payment to keep coming. That's really what it means. And because it's tough to think like, maybe I am mediocre. And there's a market for mediocre, and that's not bad. Or maybe, I'm not a star, but I can make a living scoring, games or something, and I need to take that ego hit. Do you know what I mean?
But at the same time, you're still doing what you love. A lot of people take that ego hit and do what they don't love.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's that's sort of the important hurdle to jump, which is to understand. That's sort of why I'm so blunt about the industry and how it's family connections so often, because people have one very childish notion of success in music, and it's childish because you develop it as a child. It's marketed to you. To be successful, I need to be selling records to 1 million people and filling out stadiums.
Yeah,
and I remember walking away from that model, like consciously walking away and thinking like, well, in the morning I can work on a hip hop track, then I can work on a string quartet, then I can do this 8-bit like chip tune video game thing, and then someone's doing, and I can learn about like anime music, and all day I'm being creative and making music, and 99% of the projects no one really knows except for the people doing it, and it's meaningful to them. But then the odd time you keep busy and you work on a record and there's a Juno nomination. You know what I mean? And that's cool. That's something that means something. But at the end of the day, it just, all it does is give like a triangulation point for other people to understand how to value the work you're doing. You value it yourself.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. You've got to continue doing it just for the art, not for the awards and the accolades, because that can drive you absolutely insane. And even if you do perchance amount to receiving one of these things, what happens after, Like,
absolutely. You like the next day you have to like, it's so a really hard lesson for my students is to understand that it truly becomes work. And so I'll teach them tricks to work quickly, because I tell them the story. I remember being at the point where I was so swamped with work that I was stuck in the studio and my family was at the beach. And I was like, this is one of the worst days of my life. I'd gotten to the point where I was busy enough to be so busy, and I don't have a website. I don't do promotions or anything like that. And I was like super proud of that. But my family was at the beach. This is my work, and so it's like you have to kind of treat it that way. Like, I'm getting up, I'm going to do my work today, and then I'm going to not do my work, and
you got to switch it off.
Yeah, but when you're approaching your work, you can't be looking for like divine inspiration or something. It's your job.
Yeah. I'll just wait till inspiration hits.
Yeah, exactly. Or okay. You buy it at the liquor store.
Yeah, yeah. It's more of a hobby if that's the case, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. You said that you should not put all your eggs in the TV basket.
Yes.
For that approach.
Yep.
It is also obviously important to spread yourself and diversify it more so perhaps at the beginning so that you can...
Absolutely. Yeah. At the beginning, I think it's all about relationships. You need to make relationships, and that means be busy. Work on projects you like, but also work with the people that are working on the project, Get to know them. Clarify your mutual interest in succeeding. The vast majority of people, so maybe you don't have the trust fund, maybe you don't have the uncle, but maybe your best buddy or the person that you get along really well with does. They bring you up too, you all sort of come up together. I love the phrase, an old student of mine, a guy named Dan Turcotte, he's at Monster Cat.
I went to school with him.
Did you? Yeah. And Matt, do you know Matt Shelbach?
I do not know him.
Okay, so Matt Shelbach at Chill Hop, and they both always sort of say, a rising tide floats all ships. And that's something to keep in mind too. So it can seem really cynical when I'm saying like you need these connections, but if you're not cynical about it, if you're truly just like making a relationship with someone and sharing an interest, I think that is so important. And so you can call that diversifying and working on a number of projects, but I tend to think of it as meeting a lot of people. And yeah.
It's very important. What about overextending yourself when trying to do this?
Yeah, I think depends on. I mean, there has to be a self to be overextended in the first place, and if you're breaking in, but it's true though, right? If you're breaking in, you have to break in, and you don't know. You cannot plan it. You really don't know. Like, I mean, I was a grunge rocker 30 years ago, and probably the most like, again, the Juno nominations are probably the career high point in terms of like what would look good on a resume, and that's working in like electronic dance music, which was a million miles away from that, and I got interested in it because a buddy of mine knew someone who was starting a label, and back in the day, and I really don't think you can plan it. And if you try to plan it, then again, you're just sort of like in fantasy land. So this idea of maybe I'm overextending myself, normally that only comes if you're trying to do too much on your own when there's not really a market for it, or if you're in demand, and lots of people are in demand, and that's good. So overextend yourself until you no longer have to.
So sorry, I've got another question that I was supposed to be reading here.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, you mentioned if you're getting to the point where you may be overextending yourself, is the label useful at that point for helping you out with distribution?
What label?
That's
like, I mean, yeah, I mean, the label, it's sort of like, I don't even think it means anything anymore. I'm not criticizing your question. It's just in general. I mean, what label? Some labels, some labels, no. It depends on, who's there. Do you have a relationship with the people that are responsible for this? Do they like your project? Do they like you, more importantly? Because if they don't like you, they're not going to like your project. It's as simple as that.
There's so much behind it than just the label. Okay.
Again, relationships. Again, do these people like you? Do they want to see your advancement, be part of their advancement and success? Yeah. Are you mutually invested in furthering each other?
That's the root. That's the foundation right there.
Music doesn't matter. Music is like, you're going to work just on stuff that you like.
Yeah.
And it's assumed you're good. That's the other thing I'd say. Like, it's just assumed you're good. If you're trying to make it in the music industry, you can just assume that you're good. It doesn't matter if you're good. You're not going to get a gig because you're a better guitar player or your songs are catchier. That's not how it works. It assumes everybody has a level of competence. And then after that, it's do you deliver? Are you busy?
Yeah. Then play the major leagues then. What's your take on music conferences? For example, you led Juno Week conference semi-recently.
Yeah, sure. I enjoy them. I tend not to go to them. I'm actually, like, personally, I'm a pretty shy guy. It takes me, it takes me a while to get to know people. I've been performing a lot. If I'm in a performance situation, I'm totally fine.
Yeah.
But in general, some of my favorite things to do are go into a yoga shack and doing quiet, silent yoga, or go into a meditation center and doing quiet, silent meditation. So I tend not to function well in those places because I just come off as weird, and I don't care as much as a lot of other people do. I find in similar positions, I tend to, like, I've been doing music since I was 4. I love music. I assume you're good. I don't care about the latest mic. I don't care about the latest record. I'm probably more interested in football. So for me,
that's fair. It's honest though.
Yeah.
There's a human side to you.
For me, a conference is not going to be the best venue for networking because, again, I'm probably going to be uncomfortable. Probably because I'm shy, come off as standoffish, but for someone who is social and enjoys it, it can be a really valuable thing to do. You really have to think about what are you? you
Okay.
know, yeah.
So for other people that are similar to you, how would you suggest they find their resources and make their
You
connections?
relationships, man.
Just like
Again,
social media relationships, like
get to
send
know
messages?
slide into their DM.
Yo, no word of a lie. That's what I do. No
Yeah.
word of a lie.
Thanks.
I'm in everyone's DMs.
Yeah, I have absolutely no issue with writing to people and saying, "Hey, I really dig your work. Here's what I do." I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But I also just think like you have to meet people.
Yeah.
You have to. So yes, that, but also just look around your immediate environment. Stop using, future career success as a way of escaping your context, and find the people around you and be willing to do mediocre work for a small audience and grow. You have to grow,
And you have to start somewhere. You can't
You
just
have to,
be
exactly.
in the future.
Yeah, like forget even somewhere. You have to start. My favorite expression is writers write. Remember someone said that to me because I was like, maybe I want to write. And they were like, well, writers write. And I was like, I don't like writing, so I'm not going to write.
Yeah,
Or
step
there's,
one.
do you know Mad Lib, right? When there's a great outtake where he's doing vocal takes, I think with Doom for Mad Villainy. And at some point, Doom's getting frustrated, and Mad Lib, you just hear him say, like, don't you like making records? Don't you enjoy making records? And, if you don't enjoy making records, you have to figure that out by getting stuck on a project that, may not be your passion project.
Mm-hmm.
Like I genuinely enjoy mastering, for instance. I enjoy that. I'm not a big fan of mixing because it's a bit like writing for me. It's just, I go into, it's like not good for my brain. But I think that you have to do these projects. You have to work on things that aren't for the, your glory, to understand, oh, I don't like the process.
Yeah. And then you're not in a good position if you don't like the process.
Or I love the process, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And then you go through the process and you refine and you figure out what you like more, what you're good at, and then you combine those two. You can be good at something and not like it, not necessarily want to do it,
Absolutely. And getting back to the technical question, every single engineering technique was an accident. Started as an accident that got repeated. Read Sound on Sound. You just read the interviews over and over. Every single time they're like, how did you achieve that sound? It's now iconic. Every album they were like, well, I was farting around in the studio one day. This happened. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And, and Paul loved it. And so now we did it. And then everyone studied it. And that's what every single technique is that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that only happens when you spend the time in the studio doing
Absolutely.
the work.
Absolutely.
I hear you.
Either you enjoy it or you don't.
Yep. What's your take on this? London, Ontario is underrated and doesn't get enough credit from the music industry.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. It's Music City, Canada.
Okay, wait. One moment. Why don't you think we get enough credit then?
Partially it's the market and proximity to Toronto. Partially there's Canadian culture. If it's not Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, or Calgary, nobody cares. This is part of Canadian culture. Also because, a lot of with that proximity, you have a lot of brain drain, right? You get any band that starts to make it, the very first thing they do is they head down the 401 and they start playing in Toronto. I think that's partially it. Also, we don't have a large enough market where, you can really do much beyond sort of breaking out locally. Mm-hmm. And London is a tough town. It's not super prosperous. It's a bit boom bust, and the entertainment at this point is suffering a bit.
100%.
Yeah.
It might be quite difficult to answer this question right now, but is there any way that you see possible for us to scale or tilt the scale towards us?
I love the work that Chris Campbell was doing at London Tourism, and now he's sort of broken off on his own, and he was working towards having London be a sort of premier event spot. His work with the Junos, I thought, was really well done, and everybody who was part of that show noticed that and noticed how well it went. But other than that, I think it really that's a broader question that has to do with general prosperity and economics, because at the end of the day, in a pandemic, if you're barely making it, the last thing you care about is are there raves happening?
Yes, a good point. Very good point. I've got one more. What's your take?
Okay.
Songwriting is easy.
Yeah, sure. Whatever. Everything's easy. Whatever. Like, sure. Do it.
It doesn't mean it'd be good, hey? Just
That's
start.
right. Yeah, I have this conversation all the time with artists. Painters will contact me and they'll say, "Oh, I really like your collage," and I'll say, "Oh, I'm so jealous, that you can paint. I wish I could paint." And they always write back and say, "Anyone can paint." And I always think, "Oh, that's easy for you to say," but I have the exact same point of view about like songwriting and stuff like that. I think it's really easy, but you have to be realistic and understand that there really is no inherent value to a song. One song is not better than another, right? It just, some of them through perfect storms become popular. Like, we're affixed, you can't affix sort of quantitative levels of value to something qualitative like music. So number one hits aren't better songs. They're not better songwriters. They're just successful and professional. So I do think songwriting is easy. To be professionally successful at it is professionally difficult, which I think is different from songwriting per se.
I really like that answer. It does take you
pretty
out
academic, isn't it?
It's like you talk about this for a living or something.
I know.
Yeah. Fantastic. Jay, we've got one more segment today.
All right.
Clear the air.
Question number one. Where do you get off?
Well, I mean, if you want to start with that. Actually, what we're going to do here is I have a guest question. So they recorded a video ahead of time, and I'm just going to play that for you. Yeah.
Cool. Jay, it's your mom. Why don't you call?
Okay. If you can't hear it clear, I'll just repeat it to you.
I'll let you know. Yeah, for sure.
Hi, Jay. My name's Kyle, and my question is, should you create a Twitch profile if you are a musician? Is that platform going to result in the most value in exchange for my time? And I feel like you'd be the right person to ask. Thanks.
It's a good question. So here's what I'll say. Yeah, I think it's important to engage with audiences wherever they are. I will say that Twitch is where, so I have a 13 and an 11-year-old, and my 13-year-old, that's where he hangs out, and that's where he finds music. And so you went to school with Dan Turcotte, right? So he's at Monster Cat, and they have this like blanket license thing you can do where you play Monster Cat stuff.
Yeah.
And Twitch streamers can play this stuff, and I've heard, hey, what's this? That's a cool track, and they sort of follow it down.
Find it through there. Interesting.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think so. I would say it's if it's available to you, if you can do it, great. Don't get caught up in any form of productivity porn, which is just to say, just make sure you're not actually passing the time by going into the details, learning about Twitch, learning about, if it's necessary, you'll do it. If you're, you know what I mean? If you're hurting, but if that time could be spent working on an actual project with someone, I guarantee you down the road, that relationship will be far more valuable to you.
Interesting.
Because unless you really think you have what it takes to become an influencer.
Right.
Otherwise, what value will that offer you? That's my point of view. And again, like, I don't have a sort of typical profile, and I wound up getting a degree to have a university pay my salary so I could do this. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. You took your steps, right?
Yeah. Because I wanted to, I didn't want to care what 14-year-olds were dancing to. Yep. It was that simple for me. So, I mean, I didn't want to care about like Twitch. I care about Twitch because I'm at a venue where I can just sort of dispassionately watch things happen. And I see like what used to be interest being filtered through, iTunes, MySpace, social media is starting to filter through to like Twitch and
yeah, the attention's going there.
Yeah. And Rocket League and that sort of stuff.
Rocket League
Yeah.
What? The video game?
Yeah.
People are streaming music on that now?
No, they're playing music. You know,
Right. Okay.
they'll be talking to each other, and someone
And
will
you play
put
this
some.
too?
Yeah, and there's Monster Cats, I believe, is on Rocket League. Yeah,
Jokes.
there's a playlist even. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I am not familiar with that, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
It's because you're old. Young people such as myself.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, Jay, clear the air on this.
Okay.
On March 6, 2019, Deborah Van Brank released an article titled Playing Games with the Future of Music.
Mhm.
There, you said that the gaming industry is changing the market for modern
Yes.
music and audience. Can you expand
Yeah.
on this?
Yeah, so I think it is culture. Like, this is the treehouse. This is where young people are exchanging information about culture. And so if you want to exist, you have to exist in those media. I forget who it was. Someone just did a video game concert recently, and now that's like the third highest ever attended concert. I got a text from Matt Shellbach, a buddy of mine.
Yeah.
But like a million people were at Marshmallows.
Yeah, I was gonna mention
concert.
that.
Yeah, like this is where, and I got to tell you, the very next day, dropping my boys off at the school, there were a lot of Marshmallow fans and gear,
Really?
and oh yeah, and not only that, I think like 3 weeks later, that playlist was like actually somehow managed to make it onto a Billboard chart because the streaming was so significant. This is where that stuff is. And it's not the only place, but you also have to understand that the next generation is probably your market.
It's smart. It's brilliant. It's brilliant because they're going to grow up one day.
That's right. And they're the market that you're likely to reach. The market that you're looking at now, you're actually that market.
Yep.
So this is something that I always talk with my students about. They often want to do what's really popular now, and they'll change themselves up to reach sort of that. And it's really like a kind of pandering. And that market's already passed, you know, that's already been made and packaged and marketed and promoted. There's something else coming up and coming through always. And so you really have to look to what younger people are doing, because they're the ones that are that's the audience you're going to solidify. And that's going to be your audience in the future.
So when you're studying this audience, you also said in that article that music isn't necessarily the experience. So that's you have to look at what their experience is, what they're doing day to day, and then cater the music to it almost.
Yeah, it's also it's more a question of how are they consuming music. A lot of them have a Spotify account or an Apple Music account, normally through a family account, you know. There was somebody beat me. Sorry. Okay. And music isn't the focus of attention. Now, when I was growing up, music was a focus. You would actually, like, videos would come on TV. So I'd be watching Doctor Who, and then videos would come on. Yeah. And you'd be watching and listening to videos. And even that was considered a controversial dilution of music by many in the older generation, you know?
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and so now they're interacting music in a very different way. I see this even with my students. I often do this in songwriting class, you know, because these are people who want to be songwriters. And I have to say, like, how many of you listen to music? Because my point of view is, if you want to learn to write, read. If you want to learn to make great music, listen. Yeah. And they'll all put up their hands. And then I'll say, okay, how many of you do this when you're not on the internet? When you're not, because when I was a touring musician, at the end of the night, you know, the lights would go down, you'd put on a record, and everyone would sit down and listen. And
it's not just like sit around and listen, you know, you're deeply concentrating on what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, half the time you're half in the bag or right the way in the bag, but, you know, but that's always it. Then everyone put on a record, and you listened, and that was how you learned and heard, and it was like a social experience to listen. People don't listen now. I almost find like they're anxious of it. It feels weird to them. And 99% of my students don't listen. And I rather than decry that and say, well, you should be listening, I would say, well, pay attention to that. Yeah. What are you listening to? How are you listening? Think about that as you go to create music. Don't create in an outmoded paradigm. we no longer really have much tolerance for authors. We listen primarily to playlists. You know, we do gadget consumption. Music now is sort of like streaming. We don't have a relationship with Pink Floyd. We have a relationship with Spotify. Pink Floyd comes up and we just switch to the next thing, you know?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that young artists or anyone, any kind of artist band, they should be writing and cater specifically to specific demographics, or should they like write excluding?
So this is actually the very first question you should ask if you're producing a band, which is, what is the function of this album? Is it to solidify a market, or is it to grow a market, or is it to reach a market? If you want to reach a market, then you have to think about the market. If you're trying to solidify a market, then you do what you do regardless, you know? And so I think you need to be very conscious of where you are. If you're trying to make it, again, I think about Leonard Cohen. Imagine Leonard Cohen walking into, I think it was John Hammond's office, and saying, I want to be a famous pop songwriter. And I said, well, let's hear what you're playing. And he plays like, Who by Fire. You know, the top 40 at that point has like, you know, something tells me I'm into something good. And this guy, so the thing is, people who like Leonard Cohen like Leonard Cohen. Yeah. And so he has a solid market, and they're going to come and hear that. So the older I get, the more I say, you should really do you. But it's hard because it's scary, because you have to understand that you might be mediocre by your own standards. You might only have a market that isn't as exciting as an arena filling thing, but that market is interested in you and your music. Mm-hmm. If you're worried about what someone else is doing, then all you're doing is emulating someone else. And there's a million people who can already do that. Yeah. And in any event, in art, we call that forgery.
Good point. And your energy is being allocated in the wrong direction almost, you know?
Absolutely. You're like, I have students who are in the new sort of folk paradigm, and they tour and play like living rooms. And I think this is fantastic. You know, they reach like 30 people in a night. Their overhead is like $10 by bus to get there. Whatever else is left, but they also have a personal connection with each of those people. Yeah, you know, I've been to living room shows. I like living room shows. I will actually listen to stuff that I hate, because now I feel like, oh, that's John, you know?
That's fair. It's a deeper experience.
Totally.
Than just sitting down with the headphones on, you know?
I think it's modern. I think we are breaking away from mass market product. I think we have to begin to embrace the sort of fractured listenership, or the diffuse communication. Yeah. And really just sort of, it's part of our life. It's not going to be lucrative. You know, it used to be it's really hard to make a fortune in music. It's impossible to make a living. Now it's really hard to make a living.
That's an eye-opening statement.
Well, that's my point of view. I could be wrong.
That's what we want. We want your point of view.
Right, yeah.
What do you think the results of this transition is going to be for the majority of the artist community? Do you think we're going to adapt well?
Yeah, on the one hand, I think it's fantastic, because musics that never would have been made have been made. And there's really cool stuff. Like I did this one sort of like chill hop style track with friends on this thing called Dazed Beathead Collective that I do with buddies. And Everflow, you know, who's sort of like a Jamaican dance hall singer, is sang on top of it and is putting it out. You know what I mean? And like, these things never could have happened. Yeah, you know, and like last night I'm playing a video game and he's like, what's your IPI? I'm like, shit, I forgot I need one of those, you know? And so that's happening. On the other hand, a lot of that organic growth stuff is marketing. You know, you have a lot of labels with their fingers in the streaming services, and the streaming services are kind of, you know, replacing what the label used to be. Yeah. I mean, it's worth considering that Spotify started as like a file sharing platform. And really their only business model is to sell your data at scale, right? To sell your musical preference data at scale. That's what's happening there. Because musicians are certainly not getting rich.
No.
Yeah.
0.00 something cents per stream.
Yeah, I have a royalty statement I show to my students where one of them's like, .000543261. You're like, what is that? Like
what does that even
a
mean?
PIN number?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now I've heard the justification being that, well, you know, you're not broadcasting to groups of people. That's like you're broadcasting to one person. And my friend Matt Shelbach, he will tell you, people are making money. You just have a bad deal. And that's true too. But again, I think that we now have room for music to grow in ways it never could have before. And we also don't have the infrastructure for particular kinds of music to thrive. I think the era of large-scale, ambitiously arranged things, that's very difficult to do. I mean, we don't have that infrastructure anymore. The referendum has happened. People have decided that they would rather have accessibility over sound quality, which is okay. I mean, it's value-free. It's what they want. And we're also in an extremely conservative time musically in the pop world. If you look at pop music, I mean, the fact that WAP was even remotely controversial, if you came up in the 90s, like, forget about it. It's nothing, you know? Like, I can't even say what songs were about back then because I'm afraid I'll get in trouble, you know? But like we're in a it's not just conservative in terms of theme. Musically, it's conservative.
Wow.
AABA, you know, keep that tempo mid. I'm working with a computer science major right now to scrape the tempo data and all these sorts of data off of all of the Billboard charts since they've been released, because I'm trying to actually show that at scale, the data proves this, that there is this, that as we're proliferating at lower parts of the market, the actual the where the money is already invested has become extremely conservative, right? Because it's in their interest to do so, to push this one model that works.
Yeah, it's a formula that works. Let's milk it.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfortunate for the rest of the industry, but so be it.
Well, but you can get heard playing didgeridoo over Four on the Floor. Like there's that as well, you know. Like, yes, like I forget what the number is, something ridiculous, like 68% of tracks uploaded to Spotify receive less than 100 spins in their entire life. But you do have the opportunity to occupy the same storefront window.
Yeah, you have the opportunity.
Yeah.
I think I even heard like 98, 99% don't get over 1,000 spins.
Yeah, something like that.
So...
yeah. And even then, those, I mean, I did an experiment with a couple of tracks just to see, can you actually pay for this? And I won't confirm or deny, except for to say that it is not as difficult. You know what I mean? Like the fact that I wish Spotify would actually follow Apple Music's model in not showing number of streams, because it almost becomes like a social media thing. And the artists themselves are invested in inflating their numbers to give the you know, the pretense of success.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a game, a hamster wheel. I've got one more clear the air for you.
All right.
Or maybe a couple more. We'll see.
Okay.
You've authored several books. What did you learn from this experience?
I hate writing.
So what? How does?
No,
why did you write?
Yeah. No. So when I was coming up, a lot of the people in higher education were very interested in popular music, but at the same time, they were not interested in what popular musicians had to say about it. And I found that really disconcerting and troubling because in a way, it was almost like gaslighting. It was like I was being told, oh, that's not really what you're thinking. Oh, really what you're doing is this. Oh, you don't really fully understand your experience, or your experience isn't important. And you know, a lot of my colleagues weren't even pop music fans. And they were running these big surveys because you had big enrollments. You made a lot of money off it. You could sell textbooks. And so, I mean, a lot of the writing was to explain to some of these people why we should pay attention to things that weren't even showing up. Like, I mean, but I also have to say that I have a particular view of recorded sound that I don't see shared anywhere else that has been crucial to both my creative and academic work. And it's pretty simple. It's that, you know, when we listen to a record, we think we hear sounds. So if we listen to like Zeppelin's When the Levee Breaks, we'd say, well, that's a kick drum, that's a snare drum, that's a hi-hat, that's a ride, that's a bass, that's blues harp, that's vocals, that's guitars. But of course, so we'd say we're hearing acoustic phenomena, we're hearing sounds, but we're actually hearing one sound produced by speaker or headphone diaphragms that's designed to represent or trick our neuropsychophysiology into believing it detects the presence of multiple sounds. So much of the academic record about recording practice and record production is a lot like, the way I put it is, it's like we study the history of fashion photography, but only in terms of models and how models posed. You know what I mean? So it's like we actually missed fashion photography. And so I'm trying to explain that we're doing that with music. And so that's what these, and so I try to help people sort of hear that and hear the musicality of what production people do, the creativity, how it's not just purely technical, it's not just editing, it's not just framing a pose. As a matter of fact, if you think about sample rates, really what we're hearing is a kind of stop motion animation. And it just happens at a level that Haas determined to be necessary for us to believe the illusion.
That's quite interesting.
Well, it's academic.
Yeah, well, yes.
But I will say it's also extremely freeing creatively. This is something that there's no theory behind it. I didn't learn that from someone. It was just from working and being creative and constantly thinking about what I was doing. And the second you get past that hurdle, it's so much easier to high pass a tuba because it sounds cool, even though it doesn't sound like the initial tuba. Do you know what I mean? Like you get, or you can make that cut. You can fly this vocal from the chorus here. That it just, I find it frees you when you are no longer concerned about the performance practice of Daffy Duck. You're just concerned about a really cool animation. Do you know what I mean? So I find it very freeing.
Very interesting experience. Out of all of the books that you've written, which was your favorite to write?
Oh, I'm contractually obliged to say I love all of them equally.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to have to make sure to include a list of the books in our show notes in case any of our listeners do want.
I have a second edition of Understanding Records out with Bloomsbury, which I am, that's my latest publication.
Perfect. We will keep that one in mind.
Okay.
Beautiful. Let's go back to the production process. You mentioned loudness earlier and your opinion on publishing the loudness as much as possible.
Yes.
Can you clear the loudness? Can you clear the loudness war?
Sure. Okay. So when we adopted full-scale weighting for decibels, which is to say when we went digital, loudness came at the expense of dynamic range. Of course, it always came at the expense of dynamic range, right? I mean, there was even self-noise in our listening systems. And I remember Paul Bailey interviewing him for a mastering book of interviews I did. And he said, like, if you had too much dynamic range, you'd cause car accidents. Right. Also, who's to say dynamic range is better? Like, who? It's not like, you know, we discovered it next to the monolith, a piece of parchment that said, like, dynamic range is pure and good, and you shouldn't have distortion on your masters. But who says? Maybe it sounds good. You know how annoyed I was when on, do you remember all the discussions about loudness normalization, and they were like, should we do it? You know how many forums I got kicked off because I was like, who the hell is anyone to tell me what I should do? Yeah. It's creativity. It's like telling me I can't use that color red because it's lascivious. You know what I mean? Like,
don't you think loudness has been pushed too hard after the 2000s, causing some quality loss?
Quality. Okay, so let me unpack a few words there. Too hard compared to what? Quality. What quality? Loss. You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? There's distortion. Some records sound bad. Yeah, and do you need standards to? No. What happens is the market like adjusts and says we actually don't like that, but sometimes they do. I mean, do you like you know Kylesa? Don't Look Back, like sludge metal, like the sludge metal stuff sounds fantastic, but it also sounds like it was recorded on a 4-track Tascam with one SM57 dangling from the ceiling. You know, but it sounds great for what that is.
For what it is.
Yeah, it's like fired. It would be like saying, Picasso's fantastic, but Brock is a lapse in quality because his colors are muted. Like, what are we comparing this to? Where is this coming from? We have a very classical notion of music, don't we, for a genre that is founded on like nihilistic, hedonistic fun.
That's very interesting. So I got a comparison. I got a one song that I do have a comparison for you. What about Phil Collins' "In the Air Tonight," the original versus the remastered? For example, the drum part at the end doesn't drive as hard in the remaster.
Yeah, that's okay. But what are you listening to it on? Who cares? like in terms of like, this is not, what does it matter? There's a reason they did that. There's a reason it was approved. There was a reason that it came out. You know, you may prefer the harder driving original, but again, harder driving. What do those things mean? And harder compared to what? The original?
Yeah.
All right. So listen to the original. It's available too.
But I have a point of view on that. Like, doesn't it all come down to the whole purpose of the art being like a storytelling tool, in the sense that if somebody screams a story at you, there's no dynamics, there's no fall, there's no lift.
And sometimes that's awesome. I would say the purpose of the art is to entertain and feed artists. That's it. There really is no value to this, right? The best master is the one that the client approves. Like, this idea of quality in art, in any form of art, is usually used to outlaw arts that don't fit some model. Go listen to Bad Brains, band in LA. Is it band in LA? I'm gonna lose my cred. But some early like hardcore punk is noisy, gross. Of course, it's supposed to be. It's awesome. I mean, this idea that there's a standard. There is no standard. Listen to what we listen to. Just like go on Spotify and check out your release radar. And I mean, if you listen to Dark Side of the Moon now, they completely.
This is music.
But this is my point. Listen, but that's my point. That's like that TikTok, right? Doing the Jurassic Park thing.
Oh,
that's awesome, isn't it? That's a great tune. It functions that way. It's like saying Academy Awards should only go to Shakespearean high drama. Why? Like, there's some amazing comedians. Why doesn't Jim Carrey have an Academy Award for like Ace Ventura? That was amazing. Why is that such a ridiculous notion? Right. So in other words, why are we evaluating, underground techno that has a dynamic range of like 4 against like the Beatles, which, by the way, the Beatles and Motown were engaged in a loudness war in the 60s. Huh. And they compressed the hell out of their mixes and did some really cool technical things to make their stuff louder in order to jump out of the jukebox. So I just think, again, it's reassurance. My record has a larger dynamic range, therefore it's good and I'm an artist. You're an artist because you put out music and people say you're an artist. My favorite is the Zen Roshi. They say the trick of becoming a Roshian Zen or a Zen master is to get people to call you Roshi. It's the same thing with artists. I truly don't believe that quality is anything other than like a self-serving concept.
That's very interesting. Okay.
That's my rant. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Everyone, make sure that you took notes. This was very informative. That's funny. Okay, I promise you, last, I'm having such a good time. I just, last, I want to learn a little bit more about the formula of songwriting. Does it exist? Is there a formula?
Absolutely. Otherwise, it would be just chaotic random noise.
But does it differ between genre?
It can. The biggest difference tends to be strophic and verse chorus AABA form.
And then you just apply that to any kind of genre.
If you want to learn how to write a song, the first thing you should do is analyze the structural form of songs in the genre you want to work on.
Okay. Can you?
Yeah.
You just mentioned two different formulas. Can you name them again and then tell us what they are?
Sure. Strophic is verse refrain. So like blowing in the wind, where you have a strophe and that's like a unit and it ends with a refrain. So, how many times, how often must, how blah, blah, blah. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, blah, blah, blah. Verse, chorus, AABA form is like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. So the vast majority of top 40 pop hits are AABA in some format. And it can be verse, chorus. Go listen to like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, for instance. I was listening to that today again. And or listen to most Beatles tunes or pretty much any track that is set in some form of AABA format, unless it's in, like if you're in EDM, for instance, you're going to be interested in like the build, the drop, the breakdown. But like absolutely there are forms, and otherwise it would be incoherent. We wouldn't know what we were hearing. There has to be a grammar, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, how do I know what I'm hearing is music? How do I know
Versus sound.
How do I know I'm supposed to approach this as a song?
Right. Can you still have a great song without a chorus? Or will you get that emotion? Like, what is this?
Absolutely. There's through composed, ABC. So like John Lennon's God is through composed. God is a concept by which we measure our pain. Oh. And that ends with him going like, I don't believe in Buddha. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in blah, blah. That's ABC. There's no chorus, and it's a fantastic song. I like Elvis Costello's Beyond Belief is another good example of a through composed tune. There's through composed tunes now. A lot of hip hop can be through composed.
But do you think successfully the songs that are through composed, they have to be provided, or they have to come from an artist that is already established?
Well, no. So there's a semiotic to the form, right? So if I'm writing, if I want to be an intellectual that's not quite mainstream, I'm probably going to write strophic songs. If I'm interested in having a large listenership and being played in clubs, I'm going to write an AABA dance song.
Right.
Because my strophic song isn't going to make it.
Right.
If I'm an intellectual and I want people to sit in theater seats and listen to me, I'm going to do through composed.
Right. Right. Know your audience.
Sometimes. Yeah. I mean, you're going to use all these things, but you're going like, Britney Spears, when she makes her comeback, which is coming, because I'm watching it on TikTok, you mark my words, in the next 2 years, there's going to be a Britney renaissance.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It'll be AABA.
Yeah.
And there'll be a drop third chorus and all that stuff.
So within 2 years, Britney coming in, it'll be AABA. But what about even future or even further into the future? Will it evolve, or will the formula hold?
I think that as we are, and again, it depends, but mass market stuff is going to be formulaic. It has to be, otherwise, it's incoherent to
you can't scale it if it's not formulaic. Yeah.
Yes. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like all stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Even insofar as I sat down in the theater seat, the film has started, the lights have gone up, the film has ended. So, no matter what, the musical experience is always marked in a particular way. But in terms of the format itself, repetition is actually like a cornerstone of musical pleasure. And so we have to kind of embrace that. But there is some really cool stuff happening. Like I love ambient. I love ambient music.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, and a lot of that is not even circular. It's just literally, they call that process music. And Steve Reich and Philip Glass and these people were doing this stuff. And then you had Brian Eno in the 70s when he's developing the ambient concept saying, thank God Steve Reich quit doing this strict process music because now I can do it,
Yeah.
And so that's there as well. Like, I think it all depends on what we mean when we say like the song or the form. I think pop is always going to be formulaic. AABA has been around for as long as there's been a pop industry.
Right. I hear you. Do you believe that all young artists need to understand this formula before they begin their adventure?
Yes. I know I say don't worry about the technique so much. You have to be so well versed in it that it becomes just like part of your environment. So like I you need to listen. And so, I mean, you may not need to be able to sit down and write a dissertation on it and do Schenkerian reductions of the harmony, but you need to be able to listen, have heard like everything. I mean, honestly, yeah. I think I've heard everything. I think all my friends have heard everything. Yeah. It's very rare that something I'm like, what is that? And actually, Fleetwood Mac was something where I didn't really listen to them because growing up, you know, they've become cool. They weren't cool, you know, yeah. And so I've been sort of rediscovering their like mid-late 70s stuff, but it's still like mid-late. You listen to it and you know what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's pretty rare. You should be just listening so broadly and so much if this is what you want to do.
It's part of your diet.
It's part of your diet, and that's how you learn. Yeah. I know I'm a professor, and I will say it's valuable to get an education, but you don't need that formal education. Insofar as where it's useful, I find, is in creating the networks where you'll thrive in the future. Much more than, and you can learn things and it fleshes out ideas. But in terms of the actual basics, to get back to that first section, that comes from just organic experience, just listening and being passionate.
Fully
following pleasure.
Experience.
Yeah. Pleasure is the law.
Pleasure's the law. Full circle. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
You just said that could have been your closing remarks. Do you have any other closing remarks?
Oh, I'm tired. No.
We done well. We got it all out of you.
Okay.
Can our listeners find you anywhere?
Man. Yeah, they sure. I tell you what. Like I said, I have some collages hanging in the Lower East Side of Manhattan right now, and if you're interested in art, you can find me Jay Hodgson Analog Collage on Instagram.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. I will make sure to share that with everyone as well.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you the @ right now too.
Perfect. Yes.
Because it's a mouthful. There you go.
Oh, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
And also check out Dazed Beathead Collective.
Dazed Beathead Collective.
Yeah, I'm a member, so some of the beats are mine.
Awesome.
And this is where I just have fun and do completely uncommercial stuff.
You're you. We can accept
exactly.
that. Fantastic. I want to say before we wrap up, thank you to our listeners. Beautiful to have you here every single time. Shout out to our grumpy sound guy. We did merge well today very nicely. And also a big shout out to Prevail Media Group. Without the studio and the facility, we could not do this. And then biggest shout out to Jay Hodgson. Thank you so much for your time and your energy.
That was
fun. Beautiful.
All right, man. Hey, nice meeting everyone. I'm sure I'll run into you in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to get a coffee.
Enjoy. Cheers.
See ya. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you found any value in this episode and you want to learn more from our content, check out our website at goproduce.ca. If you're on Instagram, check out our handle at go.produce. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Spotify, hit download. If you're on Apple Music, leave a review. This will all help us grow our community. I'm Big Lou, and this is Go Produce.